Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the KCC podcast, Thinking About Faith. Pastor Ed here. This is our 28th episode, and today's topic comes from a conversation that I had with our high school students earlier in March. I used one of their questions last week, and I'm doing another this week. Garrett likes to collect the students' questions, and once a semester, I get an hour of trying to bring them some answers, and I get free pizza, so it's worth it. Here's an intriguing question that I received. I assume this is a young man, but it could have been a young woman. The person was saying, I am considering joining the military, and in the off chance that I get put on the front lines, I don't know how to keep my faith while possibly ending another person's life. I don't know how to justify doing that. I was surprised, but pleased at the thoughtfulness of this question, because anyone who's considering joining the military or someone who's considering joining the police force or anything like that needs to consider how that fits into their faith, because the taking of a life, just or unjust, should never be done lightly. Whenever someone's life is taken, this is a person who is created in the image of God, a person for whom Jesus died. So we should weigh what that means before ever embarking on that kind of career. And it helps to have it set in our minds in case someone does want to join the military or become a police officer or something like that. Or for that matter, I guess, even have a firearm in their home for self-protection. Because if you're going to have a gun, they say you have to be willing to use it. It would be good if you thought through what using it might mean. Christian pacifism actually goes back to the very early church. Some of the very early church fathers advised believers that they should not consider joining the Roman legions. They asked the question, how can you kill someone for whom Jesus has died? Isn't killing someone violating Jesus' teaching that if someone strikes you, you should turn the other cheek? Isn't killing an enemy a violation of Jesus' command, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you? These are serious biblical objections, and we're right to conclude that it's not clear-cut on the question of whether a Christian can take someone's life. Now, we're not talking about in this podcast the sixth commandment. The sixth commandment often is interpreted as thou shalt not kill, but if we really look in the Hebrew meaning, it should be translated, thou shalt not murder. And I think we all agree that murder, killing an innocent, is different than killing someone who is guilty or in self-defense. Those are different sorts of situations. We should still try to not to preserve people's lives if we at all can, but it's not the same thing as murdering an innocent person. Many years ago, probably a decade ago, I saw a movie that was very popular. It was called Hacksaw Ridge, and it showed the story of Private Desmond Doss, who was a medic on Okinawa during World War II. And those of you who know about the Pacific War know that Okinawa was an incredibly bloody landing on the beaches and fighting up the main island of Okinawa. It cost many, many lives, and it was one of the concluding reasons why eventually President Truman authorized the use of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because of the commitment of the Japanese soldiers and civilians on Okinawa to fight to the last man, and the amount of American lives that were sacrificed in order to take Okinawa. Desmond Doss was a conscientious objector. He was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, although he volunteered for military service. He had been working in a shipyard, building ships, and that was a protected occupation, so he wasn't subjected to the draft, but he actually volunteered, and he became a part of the infantry. And as a non-combatant, he was made a medic. And the movie depicted, and it's true, there were some people who accused him of, because he was a pacifist, of being a coward, of not being sufficiently patriotic, and he was mistreated by many, although he proved himself several times, first on Guam, where he received 2 Bronze Stars and was wounded, and then finally on Okinawa. A medic, he did not carry a gun. He refused to carry a gun. He didn't shoot at anybody, but he tried to save the lives of the men he was around. And finally, he won their love and their respect when he single-handedly climbed up on Hacksaw Ridge time and time again to rescue up to 75 soldiers who lived, because he pulled them out of the line of fire where they had been shot and wounded, brought them down to where they could get medical care. And in doing so, he was wounded 4 times. Doing so, Desmond Doss became the only surviving conscientious objector who was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman at the close of the war. There were 2 other conscientious objectors who also were pacifists, who received the Medal of Honor posthumously for their heroism in saving American lives. So these people, I share that story just so we realize that we should treat people, maybe we don't agree with them, but we should treat people with respect. And in an age where it's very, very tempting to treat people with whom we disagree as either ignorant or as wicked, it's kind of the way people treat disagreement in our culture. We're Christians. We don't treat people like that. And so we offer respect for people who are worthy of respect. Some people at KCC come from a Mennonite background, and those original Anabaptists have traditionally always been pacifists. Traditionally, Mennonites were a peace church, along with the Quakers, the Amish, the Brethren, and many of the Seventh-day Adventists, like Desmond Doss. And they just didn't believe in potentially hurting someone or killing someone. So we should respect Christian pacifism, even if we differ from Christian pacifism. And likely you don't agree with Christian pacifism. For the 2,000 years of Christian faith, pacifism has pretty much always been a minority position within Christianity. So there were those Christian bishops who said, you should never join the Roman legion because you might have to kill somebody. And how can you kill somebody for whom Christ died? But the majority of other Christians, very early in Christian history, it's in the Bible. You remember in Acts that Paul goes to see Cornelius, who is a Roman centurion, and he eats with him, and he leads him to Christian faith. There's no record of Cornelius ever having to leave the Roman army. A number of other early Christian stories include those who served in the Roman army, including Saint Sebastian. who is said to have actually joined the Roman army in order to save Christians who were imprisoned and sentenced to death during the bloodthirsty reign of the Emperor Diocletian. And he's eventually discovered that he's a secret Christian. And Saint Sebastian, because of that, he's considered a traitor. And they order him to be tied to a stake in a field and to be shot with arrows. You may have seen statues. I remember one in Karlstein in Czech of this guy tied to a stake with all these arrows piercing him. That's Saint Sebastian. Interestingly, he doesn't die from the arrows. He miraculously survives, and he's nursed back to health. And then after he's healed, he actually, the story tells us that he approached Diocletian face to face, and he called Diocletian out and told him he needed to repent. And this time he was taken out and martyred. He was clubbed to death. But again, he actually joined the Roman army in order to help protect Christians. So there's a long tradition of Christians in the Roman army. Indeed, Constantine's father was a Roman pagan, and then Constantine becomes first a general, and then before he becomes Caesar, he has a conversion experience, becomes a Christian, but he still goes to war, wins the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and then becomes emperor, and then ends the persecution of Christians, and by the time he dies, Christianity is the religion of the Roman Empire. Biblically, there is sanction for using the authority of government to wield the sword. In Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, Paul says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." Now, of course, that's not blanket theology of just war, but it does give Paul's instruction that the state has legitimate recourse to use violence to constrain evil and to punish wickedness. Starting in the 4th century, under the teaching of the great teacher and preacher, St. Augustine, Christians began to formulate a formal doctrine that explains why military or police service, for that matter, were not violations of the 6th commandment nor of Jesus' command to love your enemies. This later developed into what we know as just war theory. It's not just as in only just, but just as in justice, just war theory, or the state-sanctioned use of violence. The theory is traditionally broken into two main parts. Jus ad bellum, that's Latin for justice leading up to war, the justifications in which it's okay to go to war, and then jus in bello, which is justice in war, which covers conduct, moral conduct within war. This would be the Geneva Convention, would be the ethics of going to within war, how prisoners are treated, those sorts of things. These principles serve as guardrails aiming to prevent war from descending into cruelty and chaos. Now let's break down some of the principles of just war. under jus ad bellum, that is just reasons for going to war. Just war theory says that at least 5 different principles need to be satisfied in order for a war to be a just war. First, there has to be a just cause. War must be waged to confront a real and a grave injustice, such as defending the innocent or resisting tyranny. So this is why America doesn't go to war to take other people's land. America goes to war to defend itself or to defend innocence. It was very clear that when the United States entered World War II, the act of bombing Pearl Harbor, causing American deaths, sinking American ships, destroying American property, that was a just cause. Likewise, I remember when the first Iraq War, when Iraq invaded and took over Kuwait, that was seen as a just cause. It was actually fascinating to see how closely, that was the first George Bush administration, how closely they adhered and pretty much ticked off the requirements of just war. It's very clear that whoever's conducting that war was not only acquainted with just war theory, but was being very careful to respond within the scope of just war theory. So just cause first, then legitimate authority. Only proper governing authorities can declare war, ensuring accountability. You may remember that during the buildup to that Gulf War, the Iraq War, that the Bush administration did everything it could to get a coalition of the willing. I think there were 40 different countries that joined the authority to go to war against Iraq. So it wasn't just the United States, although most of the military was the United States, but there were soldiers there from many, many different countries. From the English-speaking world, there were Canadians, there were British, there were other European governments, all there to provide proper governing authority. Right intention. The third requirement of just war is the aim must be to restore peace and justice, not to seek revenge or conquest. Do you remember when the American army stopped? They threw Saddam Hussein and his army out of Kuwait, and they destroyed much of the weaponry and much of the elite units of Saddam Hussein's army, but then they stopped. They didn't push to regime change, and a lot of people question whether that was wise. I have no idea. I'm not a war theorist or not, but it's very clear that in somebody's mind, peace and justice had been restored to Kuwait, and so the mission had been accomplished, and to continue on would cost unnecessary lives. The fourth requirement of just war is probability of success. There must be a reasonable chance of achieving the intended outcomes, so you don't go to war in a lost cause, because that will just mean that more people die needlessly. And the last requirement of just war is that it has to be the last resort. All peaceful alternatives like diplomacy or sanctions must have been exhausted. I'm sorry, there's one other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. All right. Proportionality is the last one. The anticipated benefits of war. Oh, I see what's going on here. They're calling proportionality the first of the justice in war. So once you decide to go to war, the force must be measured and avoid unnecessary destruction. So you don't destroy just to destroy. Once your objectives are met, then you stop. And also discrimination, non-combatants, civilians, POWs must all be protected and treated humanely. They must be fed. They must be receive medical attention, all of those things. As we conclude, It's clear that the question of war and peace is not black and white. There are Christians who would say, I'm a pacifist, I would never go to war. There are some who would say, I would go to war under certain conditions, but not under others. And so these things really need to be thought through because, of course, when you join the military, you take this oath. I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So someone who's going to join the military has got to have enough faith in the president and the officer corps that they're not going to give them illegal orders, and they have to be willing to trust that those people are giving them commands to enter into just wars. If there's any question about that, I would not join the military. Just war theory offers us a way to navigate the gray areas with moral integrity. But it also demands that we pray, that we discern, that we act in humility. Ultimately, we're Christians, and our highest allegiance is to the Prince of Peace. So whether we find ourselves called to defend the innocent or to turn the other cheek, we have to seek God's wisdom and strive to be faithful witnesses in a world that is longing for justice and reconciliation. I'm glad that the American military never engages in combat without checking off their actions and squaring it with the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there's JAG officers embedded in our military, even up to the front lines, to make sure that a proposed course of action is just under the laws of war of the United States of America. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If this episode sparked new insights or questions, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out on social media or leave a comment. And always, keep following Jesus. It's the only way to eternal joy. Have a great week.